brand new episode of the Jams and Tea Podcast where we spin the jams and spill the tea. And today we're coming at you with two brand new reviews for two brand new records. And good news, everyone, neither of them is Kanye West, because we're going to be talking today about the latest album from one of my favorite left of the dial pop musicians, one Miss Lauren Auder. I have gone on and on about releases from this woman for years, but now we are finally able to actually cover her on her new album, Whole World as Vigil, as well as an auspicious moment, the first Twilight Sad album of this decade. If you have been a longtime viewer, you know that this podcast is absolutely incandescent for this fucking band. And it is the first new release. We actually have an old 5 hour long breakdown
Legendary,
of their
legendary moment.
entire discography where we stayed up till all hours in the morning trying to make people listen to this fucking post-punk band, but we finally have their new record. It's The Long Goodbye. But first, we are going to talk about one Miss Lauren Auder, who is one of those musical discoveries I made in 2022, very early 2022, because she dropped at the end of the previous year an EP called Five Songs for the Dysphoric. I don't exactly remember how this even came across my radar. It was by complete circumstance. I think that Apple Music may have just offhandedly recommended me this release, and I was like, well, Apple Music knows I have gender dysphoria, so I guess I might as well see what all this hubbub's about. And then I listened to that album, that EP, Five Songs for the Dysphoric, and it is one of my favorite EPs of all time. It is this insanely interesting combination of art pop, trip hop, and 2000s alt rock that is blended with this very unique style and this gorgeous, deep, sultry baritone voice from Miss Lauren Auder and her incredibly revealing, often very occasionally Brechtian lyricism is the way I would describe it, but she came back 2 years later with 2023's The Infinite Spine, which I did get to shout out briefly on this show as a highlight release of the year for me. That was a terrific debut album that I utterly adored from front to back. It was just this incredibly all-encompassing portrait of basically what it is like to exist as a queer person slash trans person in the world. It's a very contemporary album without, using lots of buzzwords or, lots of signifiers that immediately makes you be like, oh, this is an album for the moment. Like, no, the writing there is so good and so thoughtful that it never broaches on feeling like it's just sort of pointing at particular issues and signifiers that maybe lesser albums would not be able to reach for and grasp when it comes to what they're talking about and how they're saying it. But now we have the first album in 3 years since The Infinite Spine, Whole World as Vigil here. And honestly, I had no clue what to expect for this album because Lauren is a deeply unpredictable artist. Her nebulous combination of influences will feel familiar to you upon hearing it, but for like 80 different reasons. I feel like people who, again, love this kind of like 2000s alt rock, like we're kind of bringing it back to our episode before in the previous week, where there's some surprising Christian rock overlap and influence on this sound that I was like, I don't know if this is wholly intentional, but like the Switchfoot vibes are still here, and I appreciate them deeply. But I was just kind of like, all right, I'm going to go into this. I'm going to not have any expectations just because that's the best way to consume Lauren's music so far. And I was utterly delighted to find out this is another stellar release from Lauren. Top to bottom, I think this is an excellent album with some excellent songs. But Jen, Lauren's an artist who just kind of throwing you at her, it's not better than if you had prepared yourself because there is no precedent that exists for music that is quite this, I don't want to say eccentric because I actually think that Lauren's sound is quite accessible, like deceptively accessible, but how did this play to you as somebody who, like, this is way more something I would typically associate with you bringing to me rather than me bringing to you? Because there is some sort of like poppier art pop and even dance pop flourishes on here that kind of put this a little bit more in your lane. So I was a little curious to see how you responded to it.
I got into this immediately because I just love the sound of Lauren's voice, that deep baritone.
Mm.
She's got this great tonal control in her voice. And I love the way that she often sings with this kind of tonality that harkens back to that Christian rock radio stuff. Like it's really there on this record, the influences of like 2000s Christian rock and radio rock. There's even a song on this that I would describe as being a full-on early MGMT pastiche in
Yes.
in most, if not all, of the layers of its construction from a songwriting perspective. It sounds like a song directly lifted from that first MGMT album that really blew up back in the day. But I also really got into the more nebulous ideas about this album as something that can be addressing the moment because, like, I'm not gonna lie, yesterday was Trans Day of Visibility, and listening to this album this week with that context has been hitting me very, very hard.
Agree.
And I've been thinking about this album as an extension of what is left of the queer survivalist movement in art and popular culture, and where it shows up the brightest in popular culture. And right now, I think it is still in these online music spaces, where people are exploring the idea of struggling to and then ultimately becoming unabashedly yourself. We see this on so many records that appear in this hyperpop scene that's very queer. And I'm not saying Lauren Auder's anywhere close to hyperpop. In fact, she really isn't. And I've been thinking about this a lot lately because I was watching Spectrum Pulse's video on hyperpop while listening to the Underscores album and going back to the Jane Remover album and then listening to this. And so I've had a lot of this on my mind lately, and a lot of it's been dancing around as I've been enjoying some of my favorite recent dance music over and over again. But I want to talk about Marrow and
Mm-hmm.
the hook on that song that I just, oh, as soon as I heard this, I kind of knew what I was getting into. And this is really when I started to fall in love with this record. But this idea of like letting greed in. I've never heard self-expression being described this way before. Of like, it is a greed to want to make myself known to the world and to work to acquire the things that I feel like I deserve. And so I loved this sensibility that Lauren was getting at. And it ends up establishing this kind of queer determinism in its lyricism of this want to be subversive, this want to be known as being subversive. Every time I walk out of the house, that's Praxis is my lyric of
Oh,
the year
that's
so
that's
far.
such an unfathomably great hook. I was obsessed with that the moment that I heard it, and I've just the whole week, man, just every time I get a spare moment, every time I walk out of the house, that's praxis. Turn the world, it's axis. It's so good. It's so good, and for a song that is entirely about it is about the nebulousness of existence in a time in which your very ability to draw breath feels like a political act in and of itself. Your existence in and of itself is an act of defiance. And it's able to put this with, again, without posturing or without coming across as though it's being not insincere, but like I guess that there's just a lot of ways you can come across as like glib or sloganeering when it comes to this stuff, just because so much of like
I mean, just
activism.
compare the way that so many songs incorporate like pride as a sentiment. And I set that as like diametrically opposed with what Lauren is proposing about greed here as a, a deadly sin that can be channeled into queer
The
resistance.
Gordon Gekko mentality. Greed is good, actually, a little bit, which is kind of true. Like the ability of a lot of trans artists to kind of embrace and absorb the taboo, but reflect it in an interesting and dynamic way is kind of the reason that I love listening to trans artists in the first place is because they give you a new perspective. And that's kind of what I value about Lauren so much is that her experience is so rooted in herself that I always feel like I'm getting a new angle on something that I didn't think about before. And it's not like these things aren't constantly on my mind, because let me tell you, they are. I'm queer. I got queer family members. I got queer members of my family in my extended family as well. This is shit we gotta be worried about. And just hearing someone full-throatedly embrace the concept of freedom, even when it's not like completely copacetic or completely acceptable by the standards of somebody else, it is kind of powerful, especially when it's like this left of the dial indie artist the way Lauren is, even though, man, I'm so like you hear a hook on something like Praxis, and it's like there's no reason for her to be underground. Like this is somebody who knows, like these hooks are so sticky and also so deceptively melodically complex, a term that is going to come back in the next review for sure, but these very, very distinct kind of like affected melodies that are buried into these hooks, they are the secret sauce of this album. Like as just the from the art of song construction, Lauren is so good at it. The only complaint I even really have in that department on this album is that there are so many songs on here that I feel like could be even more adventurous, could be taken to an even higher level, but they kind of tend to end within typical conventions, even though the way they segue in between segments in and of themselves is atypical, is strange, is unique. So I'm thinking that this is kind of an album where it feels like she is trying to grow from the Infinite Spine, but is seeing a couple of, there is a bit of frustration on here that I do feel like is in concert with the album itself. It is not an emotionally easy record to digest. None of her music actually is. But there is something about the way that it feels like these songs don't want to be contained by their length. It feels like they're actively trying to break out of their own format. And I love that feeling. I love that feeling that I can even still feel that in 2026, where I've been listening to music for so long and I listen to all this fucking avant-garde bullshit all the time, which I love, but I do. It is avant-garde bullshit, and I can still be surprised by something like this because of the smart melding going on here, and just the sound of it is so big and loud and compressed and fun.
It occasionally gets a little too loud and too compressed. Like I think the last leg of Pier gets to a
I
point where all
agree.
the layers are just kind of cresting over each other in a way that doesn't quite work.
Hmm.
But most of the time, really aside from that one moment, this album sounds incredible. Reminded
So
me a lot
good.
of the Quatica album, actually. It's leaning a lot more in this kind of elegantly echoed and manipulated traditional instrumentation with these digitally manipulated vocals that create this kind of digital gospel aesthetic in a weird
Hmm.
sort of way that's influenced by like soul and pop music in a way that makes it reach for a different kind of height than your regular like Christian rock radio that might sound like a more tame version of this. It's
Hmm.
going a little bit further. It's got a little bit more ambition to it. It's reaching for greater heights aesthetically. It's kind of push against the boundaries of the tropes of what is essentially still a lot of art pop music. It's very artsy, but still pop music and still wanting to use a lot of those frameworks because a lot of these songs are very structurally sound, but structurally simple in a way that a lot of great pop music is.
The thing I kept coming back to in terms of comparison is that I'm frustrated that Lauren's not more popular at this point because she resembles so many different modern, like, held aloft queer and trans artists that like I know there's a market for this. Like it isn't just weirdo shit for me specifically. Because the thing I kept thinking about when listening to this, other than a comparison that was thrown out there by shout out to a longtime friend of the show and Pitchfork writer Hannah Jocelyn, who recently had a nice little piece come out. I might, if I remember to link that in the description below, I absolutely will. But she described one of the songs on this album as like Hoobastank's The Reason if it was made by like a trans like pop artist. And I haven't been able to escape that because it's completely on the money, but like in a positive way, in a very, very complimentary way.
There's a
But the thing I
reason
kept
why There's
Yeah,
a reason why we still think about that song, that Hoobastank song.
I mean, look, listen, it is
It's
kind of a
got the
banger.
juice. I don't
We
know
we
whether you want to
have
admit it or not. It's had the juice for 20 years.
we have an old episode of our Now series where we talk about guilty pleasure songs, and Riley, Morgan, and myself, we're all going to bat for Hoobastank's The Reason, even though lyrically that song's kind of meaningless. But whatever, so many songs are meaningless. Bohemian Rhapsody's meaningless. Who gives a fuck? But the other thing I thought of so much was Anohini and the Johnsons, particularly like their last record that came out that we reviewed very, very positively, both from a like sort of vocal standpoint, mainly because it's got that contrast of the very deep, very soulful delivery that's kind of contrasted by this gospel adjacent, very atmospheric, large, but still muscular sound. Like that's the great thing about Lauren's sound that I think has sort of kept so much of her work so buoyant so far is that it feels muscular. The rhythms on this album are strong. Everything
Mm,
here has a really strong bedrock too. So much of this music can often sound a bit ephemeral, like it's trying to escape you. But this to me is way more immediate. It's way more hard hitting. And combined with those vocals, it just always hit me like a fucking sledgehammer. This is something that deserves to be listened to on loud, big speakers if you can possibly get it that way. Because even though a lot of these instrumentals are a little bit more on the compressed side, this is something where it's like, this is employing compression in an artful, skilled way that I think is not a crutch, as it often is with lots of pop and rock albums that just want to fill out their mixes and sound bigger and sound louder just because that's the way music sounds and you got to do it. No, I think that there is an artistry here to it. And there are moments on here that really caught me off guard that like the song that I think it might be my favorite right now, it's either that or Praxis, but it is Candles, which is this very frank, almost like semi first person recollection of something that happened to someone that Lauren knew. And the storytelling here is a bit elliptical, it's a bit abstract, but if you listen to this, I think you can kind of get a handle on what the song is talking about. And oh man, after like once I finally sort of like once this song clicked for me in place, I don't really want to spoil it just because I want people to listen to this so badly that like
mm.
like these songs are like they're like loot boxes, you know, you never know what cool little treasure you're actually going to find within them. And
There's
when I
all
listen to
kinds of
this,
great surprises on this album. Here's one that I'll give you, which is the weirdest moment on this album. Is there's a
please.
Ghostface Killah sample.
Yes! Yes!
If you heard that and your ears perked up, go listen to this.
Precisely, precisely. Who is doing it like that? I can't think of anyone. But the moment that kind of stopped me dead in my tracks on Candles was really that like once I listened to this song again and kind of went in knowing where it was heading, man, this first verse hits like a train. Oh my God. And even just the chorus, I love the both you collapse in one you fix, both collapse in one you fix. It's seeing like this basically this person who I read as like discovering something about their identity that perhaps they are about to identify as something new or, you know, just discover something about themselves. And in framing it like this, Lauren writes about it in saying that, like, in both scenarios, in both worlds where you both embrace yourself and when you reject yourself, you die in both of those worlds. But in only one of them do you get that fleeting moment of happiness where you actually embrace yourself. You're gonna die either way, so you may as well die happier. And it's like that is such a complicated, dense thing to pack into a three-line chorus. That's fucking crazy. Like she has not lost a step when it comes to her pen. Like this, like The Infinite Spine was an album that like leapt out at me and like I cried the first time I listened to songs like Hawthorne 33 and shit like that. And this album got me close too. It's a little bit more emotionally digestible just because the themes here are a little bit more universal feeling, but I feel like that's intentional. If like you need an in with Miss Lauren Auder, Oh my God, please take the opportunity to use this as you're in and then go further from there. She has several EPs that are very good after this, but you do have to get on this very specific wavelength, like her voice, the instrumentals, her style of writing. You kind of gotta you gotta do a little like shift everything to the left just because with a lot of these queer artists, they do really feel like they are taking steps to form their own style of writing, their own style of just trying to assert themselves in the world of artistic construction and making themselves just a little bit weirder and a little bit more hard to understand. It's kind of a it's sort of a built-in mechanism that's like a filter, you know? Like if you don't get it, you don't get it. But if you really want to know what these people are talking about and what they're saying, they make it a little bit more difficult for you, but with purpose. And I like, please, more challenging pop music, please. Ask more of me. I want to work. Let me put in the work. And
Let me
Lauren Auder
think.
let me put in the work this week, and I was very thankful for that.
Yes, I loved putting in the work of being with this album and sitting with it and thinking about it. I've loved this. It's also, I've been listening to Purple Rain this week. This has
Ooh,
got tons of Prince influences all over it, which
yes,
I've loved thinking
yes.
about.
There's an R&B to her sound that I feel like is becoming more and more pronounced with every release. And I want to see that going because again, her voice is kind of perfect for it. And if we lean more into the Anohni and the Johnsons influence, I don't know. I like Lauren's like one best new music from Pitchfork away from being one of the artists that people are talking about. So, you know, stream this and make it happen. That's what I'm
I was gonna
saying.
say, almost every album that we review is an implicit recommendation, but please take us seriously when we're like, go support Lauren Otter. We love this record. We love her. We want to see her succeed.
Absolutely. And in a kind of double decker of underrated, it's so odd that I have come to the point in my life where, of the two reviews I am doing for this show, the Twilight Sad is the more popular one. That that's a little weird. That's and I wish it was for reasons that they had blown up because of this album, and you know, that's not quite the case. But right now, we're going to talk about my maybe most anticipated album of the entire year at this point. It's The Long Goodbye from the Twilight Sad. And when I say most anticipated, I mean I have bought every single live release this band has dropped on Bandcamp because I know they're not huge. Thankfully, they have gotten a little bit bigger because of touring with one Mr. Robert Smith of The Cure, which I think is very important to keep in mind when evaluating the sound of this album, considering it sounds exactly like The Cure. But the Twilight Sad are who else but a Scottish indie rock act. And I feel bad calling them indie rock because they are definitively a post-punk band, but they have melded their sound with so many different things over the years. They started as this weird kind of shoegaze band, and then on their sophomore album, they graduated into noise rock, which is one of my 15 favorite albums ever. Forget the Night Ahead. And then they got more into the like new ordery electronic post-punk stuff on the album after that. And then there is, of course, their kind of revered record that sort of kind of put them on the map with the people who know about the Twilight Sad. That, of course, being Nobody Wants to Be Here and Nobody Wants to Leave. One of the most perfect post-punk albums that has ever been made, and I am far from the only person who will say that. But It's the Long Goodbye is the first album we have gotten from them in 7 years, and I have been trying to tirelessly support this band because, again, they're not the biggest in the world. I didn't even know if this album was, you know, if it was reasonable to expect another record from them. But thankfully, the slight buoy that they have been given over the past few years has put them in the spotlight. It won't be like this all the time. A phenomenal record from 2019 was actually one of their most well-performing records thus far. And so It's the Long Goodbye is in a strange place where it's like, where does this band go from here? Like, how are they going to evolve their sound? Because they are quite a malleable band. When it comes to the genres that they delve in, they have explored every which way. So I guess it's really only fitting that on this new album, they just kind of condense every possible post-punk influence imaginable into a highly compressed neutron star of a record that just sounds, oh man,
Let's
oh,
get
this
this out of the
album.
way. Let's get this out of the way. This album is gorgeous.
I
Densely
was
layered,
stunned.
loud as hell, but with expert mastering that makes all the instrumental and vocal melodies work perfectly in tandem with each other. The dynamics of the vocals work so well with the
Oh,
timbre of the instrumentation the whole way through. And it's a real test to get it to be that way because this album is very gothy and very groovy.
mm.
So there's a lot of sounds that are just kind of always on when you're listening to this record, but they never feel like they're overpowering anything else. Everything feels like it's so perfectly placed in the mix. It's so well done.
It doesn't hurt also that the main vocalist and performer, James Graham, who is one of my favorite front persons in any band, his kind of close affiliations with another podcast favorite band, Frightened Rabbit, are like there's a very similar kinship I find with James and Scott Hutchinson in that the tenor, the Irishness of their voice is so pronounced. Like it's not like when you listen to lots of English bands and it's like, oh, when they sing, you don't really hear the accents. They just kind of sound like, and then they talk and then they sound more British. No, 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 no. You know that this dude is Irish the moment he opens his mouth. And honestly, that adds something to this. There's a specific kind of tenor that the way he holds syllables, just I love the way that James Graham says words. And I know that sounds kind of simple, but just his pronunciation is so good. The way he delivers hooks, it's extra sticky, it's extra memorable. So, you get these little moments of just get away from it all. I love that, and I love how it's managed to fit his vocals into these pockets where these blaringly loud instrumentals that are decorated by some of the noisiest guitars that have been on a Twilight Sad album since the debut, and not to mention the gorgeous sparkly synths that are all over this that sound like beautiful mid-era The Cure, and I eat that shit for breakfast. I absolutely love these sonic touches, and I love the rhythm section. I love how the fact that despite the compression, despite how dense as these mix are, the bass is there. It's audible. You can feel it. And this is probably the most danceable Twilight Sad album since No One Can Ever Know, which I think is quite impressive, even though when you get into the lyrical content of this, it's not exactly an album that I see myself dancing to in the future. The Twilight Sad are kind of known for their notoriously difficult subject matter, and the way that they write about that subject matter is often kind of obtuse. But in our video where we go through their discography, we kind of discover that lyrically speaking, the metaphors and pageantry of the lyricism kind of sheds a little bit more with every single release, to where it won't be like this all the time. Was a record that just it was so primal. There was not a lot of poetry to it. It was just these things that felt stream of consciousness directly from Graham's lizard brain. And it felt uncomfortable and disarming, but also just so evocative and so emotional. And we are turning a bit back. We're not progressing further, which I kind of think is a smart move because how do you even go further than that writing wise? But we scale back because the subject material on here is unfortunately heavily informed by the fact that I'm not sure if it was Graham specifically or just another member of the band, but basically a lot of this album is about watching a loved one succumb to the slow degrading mental state inherent with something like Alzheimer's. And Twilight Sad, Emily Scott Robinson having one of the best songs of the year be about watching an old family member slowly slip away. And it's rough, but it is very effectively written about on here. I mean, like there are moments that despite the bustling attitude of the production. Stuff like Get Away From It All and Designed to Lose. Get Away From It All is just this desperate song about trying to prevent the inevitable and not being able to because it is inevitable, but you struggle nonetheless because you feel you have to. There is no other place you can be other than between the rock and the hard place, and you just have to go, and that's what the lyrics to this song are about. And then Designed to Lose kind of feeds off of that in that Designed to Lose. Human beings, we are mortal. We are designed to lose. We live so that we die. This album is very preoccupied with grief and mortality and just the notion of trying to rationalize that which really can't be and the frustration that comes from it. There's so many moments on here like, oh man, there's moments like waiting for the phone call, which is just
Oh
this
God.
unbelievable thrashy rager of post-punk that like it sounds like the meeting point between My Bloody Valentine and Preoccupations, and it's fucking immense. Like I felt shook by this song by the time it hit me in the track list. It was like, and you come off the back of the insanely great opening three-track run of Get Away From It All, Designed to Lose, and Attempt a Crash Landing theme. And it's just like the front half of this is a wrecking ball of noise. And that even extends to the Ceiling Underground. Like the My Bloody Valentine influence, the level of effects pedals on here, it's enormous. Like there are moments on here where I was like, damn, this actually sounds like Loveless, like Inhospitable, Hospital, Dead Flowers, Chest Wound to the Chest. All of these songs are just like, oh God.
This gets surprisingly shoegazy. And I
Mm-hmm.
think what surprised me the most about this album was the way that it continued to become more danceable, I would
Yeah.
argue. Like
Yeah.
the melodies and the arrangements become brighter as the album passes, even as the lyrical content kind of oscillates between this kind of devastation, quietly defeated acceptance, and back again. Where at the same time that you can have a it's water off a duck's back, give me my fucks back. And then by the end of Chest Wound to the Chest, you're getting this riff and this idea of like, no one is getting out, no one is safe. Just this complete rock bottom acceptance of the idea of death, and then this segue into back to 14 where you're realizing that you've found yourself stuck in the begging part of the grief cycle, where
Mm-hmm.
which is where you spend the most time as a younger person when you don't quite understand what it is exactly that you're dealing with when you're in a situation like this. And when you regress to that state of mind, it can become this terrifying thing. But then the absolute euphoria that is the sound of TV people still throwing TVs at people,
Yes.
which
What a
is
song title.
some of the funniest song titles of the year on this very sad album.
That's the
Which
Twilight Sad, baby.
Inhospitable Hospital. I'm sorry, that just
That
sounds funny.
that's fun. No, it is. Like that is kind of just one of the many tricks up this band's sleeve of trying to I guess subtly kind of just diverge from expectation. And I don't know, I love the way that this really does update a much older part of their sound, but combines it with a lot of the digital techniques that they've been applying more and more as a band as they've gone on. And they're doing it really well. Like it's a really skillful, really tasteful inclusion that I get a lot out of. Like this album, sonically speaking, reminded me more than anything else of my favorite New Order album, Technique, the danciest New Order album. It just sounded like the synths were way more saturated and the guitars were a lot fucking louder. And, I'm still admittedly wrapping my head around a lot of the songwriting on here because you can tell a lot of the time what a Sad song is about, but not necessarily how it's about it, if you know what I mean. Because the
Yeah.
grammatic choices and linguistic choices that Graham employs, they are very specific and they're almost designed to trip you up. And like upon reading them, you're kind of like, what does that mean? And then you kind of have to let them sit with you. So I haven't fully digested everything this album is about, but every time I made a little discovery, it had that sauce, man, where this band is so amazing at writing the way that they do that each time I gleaned onto a lyric and I was like, oh, wait a minute, I think that's how this connects. It felt so rewarding, which is something that's true about every single release this band have put out, is that they have this kind of this sort of, I mean, it's the treasure chest quality that I mentioned in the Lauren Auder review that we just did, is that there is something unexpected in all of these that you get to unearth for yourself, and it feels very personal. The lyricism is so impressionistic that even when it's hung onto a more definitive concept, as this album is, again, it's so preoccupied with grief and mortality and watching someone else wither away and kind of feeling helpless about it, it still manages to find interesting wrinkles and folds within itself. And I love that. It means that for as long as this band have persisted, they've never, like, their pen has never, ever been better, frankly. I find so much of this to feel just as rich as past albums had in a way that it hasn't before. In fact, I would say that the personal touch on this album does actually remind me of Forget the Night Ahead, which is their biggest and noisiest sounding album, and unfortunately, coincidentally, was also informed by the death of a close family member. So I'm wondering if the kinship between these two albums is more than just purely circumstantial, as somebody who's been paying attention for such a long time. But I'm so in awe of the mixes here because you don't expect an album from a band this small to sound this expensive. Like it doesn't feel right for some reason, but and yet I'm sitting here and I'm like, this is the best sounding album I've heard all year, and that's not an easy task.
That's the thing about such an impressionistic approach to like song construction. When you want your instruments to do more than they tangibly can with the abilities that come with human skill and the fixed progression of time, you have to figure out how to, make it sound right. I don't know how else to say it. You
So
have to put a lot of work in and it takes a lot of skill to make something this abstract. And it's gonna end up, why are you laughing at me? I feel like I'm losing my
because
train of
no,
thought.
because I just looked up who produced this album, and it's literally the guy who worked on My Bloody Valentine and Slow Dive. We hit that fucking shoegaze
You
bullseye
you hit
so
that. That was
hard.
all. That's all you.
Yeah, hey, no,
Um,
you were pushing the shoegaze angle, which this definitely still has. It's kind of actually, now that I'm thinking about Slow Dive, this is like the parallel universe evil version of the Slow Dive self-titled, which is a poppy shoegaze dance album, but like is big and expensive sounding, and you just don't think that all these things are going to go together. This, on the other hand, is the same way. It's just it makes you feel a lot worse than that album does.
it's all to create because so much of this album is about disassociation. I think that was the point that I was trying to get at with
Yeah.
what I was saying about the impressionistic approach.
Hmm.
You really start to convey that sense of dissociation when you go digital with it and you start messing with what these instruments can even sound like in the idea of fixed meters and the idea of time signatures and manipulating all that and messing around with the tangibility of the sounds. That's where you get that kind of stream of consciousness, dissociative narrative quality that so much of this album has.
I also just love seeing that, like, if you go back and look at what previous Twilight Sad albums kind of focus on, like the debut 14 Autumns and 15 Winters is this heavily inspired by like the work of Stephen King and like Stand By Me and stuff like that. And it's channeled into this very distinct and specific sound. And the synergy of it is that it's this like there are these stories and characters on this album that are buried and suffocated under the noise and darkness of the subject material. And it feels like with every passing record, they find a way to make a new angle on their sound, infringe on what they're talking about in a way that feels really, really smart. I have trans day of visibility is that forget the night ahead. I actually have a pretty solid working theory about this album being about gender dysphoria. There's some moments on here, and like it's about identity, and there's a lot of talking about just sort of societal gender role expectations and like sex work and stuff. And
Hmm.
specifically with it being so noisy and aggro and harsh, it feels like it reflects the subject material better than anything else possibly could. It is oppressive. You feel like you have to push against something just to listen to the album. And so on here with It's the Long Goodbye, it being a bit more danceable actually feels kind of right. Because think about what the album ends up saying when it comes to the inevitability of mortality. So it's like, you may as well. Like, all of these things are going to happen. The inevitability of death is scary. So use the time well. So use the time with the people that you love in order to embrace the movement, to embrace the dance, because you won't be able to do it forever. And it's like, oh, that's kind of like, that makes me feel kind of bad and weird and mortality's scary. But it's like, I don't know. I think it really gives this album a definitive identity that I love. It's such an addictive listen, man. Like every time I went back to this, it was just like, the hooks are still great. The instrumental hooks are even still great. I've got little like these little chromatic guitar hidden in these songs, and it's delectable. I love the sound of this. If it was just the instrumentals, I would probably be telling you all to listen to this anyway. So the fact that it's got more, it's just a bonus, really.
Loved this record. Really got into the shoegazy elements of this because this is my first Twilight Sad. I had no idea what to expect going into
Honestly,
this or how I was gonna.
not a bad entry point considering how just again, like if you like The Cure, if you like post-punk bands like that, this is a very easy sell. I would say that this is an easier album to get into than like the first two albums. But like if you enjoy this, just start there. Make your way through. I like this is one of the best discographies in modern music. If you ask me point blank, who are the most underrated working band? It's the Twilight Sad, and it's like whoever is in second is not close. And it's not because they're not bigger or they're smaller. It's just that this is a very tiny band, but they deserve so much more. So if there's anything you take away from both reviews today, please go listen to these instead of whatever big album of the moment is currently consuming the airwaves, because that'll be fine. People will still be listening to it. Give these a chance.
Yes. Big thumbs up for both of these records. Big thumbs up for
Hell
Lauren
yeah.
Auder
Happy
and the Twilight
belated
Sad.
Trans Day of Visibility, everybody. Now we're invisible. Are the straights gone? If you enjoyed this episode, please stay tuned for the next week where we will be talking about new reviews and new records. We just got an announcement today that Converge are coming back again in a
I
very
can't
short amount of
believe
time.
this.
I am so fucking excited, man. This year just keeps giving and giving and giving and giving, and we will also be here to give. But as always, everyone, rock over London, rock on Chicago. Allstate, you're in good hands.